Good afternoon. Welcome to our discussion about mitigating risk in a zero trust world. As you guys may have guessed from the title, we're going to touch on some of the factors that are impacting our federal government and the broader public sector and the operating environments that underpin them. So for example, we've been living in a COVID restricted world for the last year, which is part of the reason we've done so many things virtually that we have not before. More of the public sector workforce than ever before has moved to a full-time permanent telework basis. This shift has forced us to collaborate more than ever in virtual environments, requiring networks and architectures and systems that underpin these systems to share information on an unclassified environment. Additionally, we have the recent series of cyber attacks, from the software supply chain attack in December to the recent pipeline ransomware attacks. This has led our government to issue directives and executive orders designed to move our federal departments and agencies into more of a zero trust based architecture. We're going to cover what that means for both the DoD and for federal civilian agencies alike, and we'll talk about the implications for unclassified environments and for protecting data traversing those unclassified networks. Given these environmental and policy changes, we have to be more focused than ever on some of the threats that happen both from the outside as well as from the inside of these environments. These threats can be malicious, but more times, often than not, they're either accidental or something that is unmalicious and unintentional in nature. But protecting the data is what is at the core of what it is that we have to do going forward, which is why I think this webinar today and this virtual event today is pertinent and relevant, and why we look forward to having this discussion. So before we begin, before we introduce the keynote speaker for the day, I want to turn it over to the folks who are helping make this possible today. We're gonna ask Anne from Code 42 to give a brief intro and to tell us a little bit about Code 42 and what it does. Anne, over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for tuning in for this important and timely discussion. My name is Anne Morgan. I am the Director of Federal at Code 42. Code 42 has been recognized by Gartner as the leading solution provider for insider risk detection and response. We received our FedRAMP moderate authorization through sponsorship from the Department of Energy this past December for our product called Insider. With Insider, security teams are now able to effectively mitigate file exposure and data exfiltration risks without disrupting legitimate collaboration. The foundation of Insider's ability to speed insider risk detection and response comes from monitoring all file activity, regardless of what is considered acceptable or unacceptable by security policy. Insider logs every file event and enriches it with context on the vector, file, and user to determine what represents real risk. This allows Insider to not only reduce alerts and investigation time, but also remediate risk that goes unnoticed by traditional data security technologies. Code 42 was founded in 2001. We currently have over 50,000 customers, including 20 federal accounts who leverage our solutions. Many of the security companies you currently utilize as your SIEM, SOAR, EDR, and identity access management also use Code 42 to protect their proprietary and important data. Not only are these entities customers, but they are also ecosystem partners in the fight against insider risk. Today, as organizations embrace cloud and collaboration tools with many employees working remotely, data leakage and data exfiltration has become a major concern to risk managers, CISOs, and insider threat program leads. Security leaders not only list malicious insiders, but employee carelessness as the two leading causes for a data breach ahead of external actors. Tools to manage insider risks have not kept up with the way employees work. Code 42 Insider allows organizations to apply a zero trust model to data protection to ensure all employees and contractors are not putting data at risk, whether intentional or unintentional. which is why I'm very excited to introduce the topic of discussion today, insider risk in a zero trust world. With the recent executive order published by the Biden administration to modernize and implement stronger cybersecurity standards in the federal government, it mandates the adoption of zero trust architecture and secure cloud services. In many ways, this helps with controlling for insider risk. We are excited to begin an intentional policy discussion on the risks that user activity poses to sensitive information stored on unclassified systems. COVID has changed the landscape and pushed us to a virtual and hybrid world that will likely continue long after we bounce back from the pandemic. Solving for insider risk is more important than ever, especially as agencies put more sensitive and critical data on our unclassified networks and push it out to our virtual workforce. So with that, thank you, Sudha Vyas, for joining us today as our keynote speaker. We are looking forward to hearing your thoughts on the issue, and thank you to our panelists for taking the time to talk through this important topic. I'll turn it over to Ross.
Thanks again, Ann. We appreciate it. So like she was saying, we are lucky today to be joined by, we're lucky to be joined by both Grant Schneider, who is the former federal CISO for the United States government. He covered a lot of federal civilian agencies, and Sudha Vyas, who is the Chief Cybersecurity Architect for the Department of Defense. She is one of the senior leaders in the CIO's office at the Department of Defense and has done significant work around zero trust architectures. And she's joining us in the discussion today to talk about exactly what we've just been covering in the preamble to this. So we're excited to have her. It's one of the first times she's covered it since the DoD reference architecture came out. So we're looking forward to her discussion, especially about how to protect that data on unclassified networks. So with that, I'll turn it over to Grant and Ms. Vyas for the keynote.
Great. Well, thank you, Ann, and thank you, Ross, for the introductions. I am super excited to be here, to be part of this webinar today. I'm also super excited that we have Sudha Vyas, the Chief Cybersecurity Architect at the Department of Defense. And Sudha, I absolutely love your title, because it really encapsulates the need to bake cybersecurity in at the absolute beginning of the design of any system, any network, any information system, and really doing it at the beginning. We've seen for years the failures of adding cybersecurity at the end of a project, and I love that DoD has really dedicated someone to be thinking about this at the forefront, and I imagine driving others in the department to take this into account. Over the last 6 months have really been an unprecedented time for cybersecurity. We've had significant breaches. We've had vulnerabilities that were compromised or exploited, and really it has sparked a bit of a national dialogue on cyber in a way that I've never seen in my career, watching this space and being a part of this space. And so we've got a recent cybersecurity executive order. We've got more focus on zero trust. We've got concerns about our data and our information, and we're building systems that are more complex than ever. And at the same time, we're more dependent on those systems. Agencies are more dependent on those systems to deliver on their mission than I think we really ever have been before. So again, really excited about this dialogue. Really excited, and thank you, A, for your service to the nation, and B, for taking time to talk with us today. So Sudha, I thought maybe if we could just talk a little bit and start with, if you can introduce yourself to the group, talk a little bit about what the Chief Cybersecurity Architect does at DoD and how you fit into that ecosystem.
Yeah, so good afternoon, Grant. Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate Venable reaching out and having given this opportunity to share a little about some of the departmental initiatives that we're doing, especially in the zero trust front. So yeah, the title sounds great, right? So what is it really in essence? So the key thing the key summary of the role itself is being the principal advisor to the Department of Defense, the Chief Information Officer, in regards to the department's cybersecurity reference architecture. which is also known as the CSRA. So the CSRA is instrumental because that's the department's blueprint and how we're moving from an immediate to near-term perspective in our cybersecurity posture. And so that's important to note, because when we're talking about zero trust, it's how do we fold in those zero trust principles within that cybersecurity reference architecture? And how do we make sure it maintains its agility and its threat informed? So even those two key terms are huge. But yeah, I'm super excited to be part of this. As you may know, some of the key initiatives going on in the department is finally we got the approval for the public release of the DoD's zero trust reference architecture. So this was instrumental. It's a great effort, a collaboration between NSA, DISA, USS, the Cybercom, and then also CIO. And of course, there's a slew of others, but I definitely want to give a shout out to those key team members because they did the heavy lifting and putting this out. The most important thing, again, is that making it publicly releasable, because again, one of the key stakeholders, partners with the department is industry, and making sure that we're aligned and moving cohesively towards that zero trust construct. I think this is a great step forward. So in regards to, besides zero trust reference architecture, we're also putting out the zero trust strategy. So that's in the works. And that's going to be important because it's actually identifying what is that roadmap? How do we collectively roll out the zero trust principles across the department? So that should be coming forth. And then again, from leadership down, showing leadership's advocacy and the determination for the department to embrace the zero trust construct. It's the stand-up of the Zero Trust Portfolio Management Office. So that's also upcoming. The key elements for that ZT PMO is going to be the governance, making sure we have the right authorities, the resources, and those key elements or activities required, again, to make this successful.
No, that's fantastic. And I agree with you. Being able to publicize the architecture and being able to publish, hopefully the strategy will also be public when it comes out, because I think those are super helpful to industry who's trying to support DoD, but it's also really helpful, I think, for the rest of the federal space who often emulate DoD and look to DoD for some best practices. And really, I think as a nation, our federal government and the executive branch are all moving towards this zero trust environment. One follow-up question on the PMO that's going to come out, the Zero Trust Program Office. How will your office interact with them, or is that known yet? Are you going to have some oversight role or some directional role, or is it going to be a collaborative relationship there?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So, given that we've got the marching orders from Mr. Sherman to stand it up, of course, it's going to trickle down, right? So it goes from Mr. Sherman to my boss, to the DoD CIO, CISO, Mr. McEwen. And so the CIO right now, they're on point to actually start formulating what that PMO would look like. This goes back to the authorities, right? In order for the ZT PMO to be successful, you need to make sure whoever is in charge has appropriate authorities. Because it's going to be imperative if we have someone, or if we install someone who does not have the appropriate authorities, it's not going to have the same effect as in order to direct the key efforts taking place. So that's still a little bit TBD, but right now CIO has a lead in actually formulating what that PMO is going to be like. And again, this is going to be collaborative, reaching out to the various key stakeholders. That's going to be part of this to actually form, like, what do we really need to make this into a very structured and informative PMO.
And it sounds like your office, you set the architecture direction and guidance for the department, and the PMO, it sounds like it's going to help the other program offices probably and departments and agencies inside of DoD really adopt and help them kind of on an implementation standpoint going forward.
Yeah, so that's another great point, Grant, because we definitely can put the strategy, and it's going to be up to the MILDEPs or the services, right, to implement. And so the services, it's going to be instrumental to work with them, because some of the services, they have moved forward in adopting or implementing some of the zero trust principles. And so making sure that there are key stakeholders in this ZTPMO is going to be instrumental for the success. But yeah, it is an all hands on deck, like that Navy term, in order to get this moving towards the right direction. But it is, there's a couple key themes for me, which is I love a challenge. So this is definitely a great challenge, but it's a great opportunity. And we are at this opportune time across the department where we have leadership's advocacy and support in actually making sure zero trust moves fast.
Yeah, and that's so important, right? In any organization, having leadership's buy-in. And I think, you know, again, we've had a whole bunch of, you know, unfortunate events, you know, stronger than unfortunate over the last few months in cyber. You know, if there's a silver lining is, you know, I think there is a lot of leadership attention at a national level, and certainly inside the department, as well as other departments and agencies across the federal space. So excited to see that. Also, as agencies are thinking through, or teams are thinking through implementing zero trust, one of the things that I know the department's focused on, I know federal civilian agencies are focused on, is the data and information we house in our unclassified networks. Right? I think historically, you know, we've had this, well, the important stuff is inside the classified networks, and so we don't need to worry as much about the unclassified. But we've seen over the years through a number of issues and incidents and breaches, you know, we really do have mission critical data and information, and that's really sensitive and needs to, for a variety of reasons, be kept on unclassified systems. And so protecting that data and that information is absolutely critical. Can you talk a little bit about, you know, how your office is helping people across the department work and protect information that's housed in those unclassified systems?
Yeah, so I will say again, this is a team effort. So there's a lot of things we're looking and we're learning, not only from across the department, specifically from the services, but then also from our industry team members. So this is where that zero trust, the principles actually really weigh in, right? So if in the DoD zero trust reference architecture, there's 7 key pillars identified, and it goes from the user's devices, networks, applications, visibility, the orchestration, the ability to view what we have out there. But the main thing is data. So how are we treating data as that key critical information? And so this comes up from the top to the bottom, where we have the Deputy Secretary of Defense, who's directed us to move towards a data-centric organization. And if you look at the efforts that we're working on right now, whether it's through the cybersecurity reference architecture and then also through leveraging zero trust principles, it's moving from a network-centric to a data-centric paradigm. So what this requires is not only, it's a combination of both the technology, but then also in regards to the workforce. So the cybersecurity workforce is instrumental. There's a paradigm and shift in regards to the skills. And fortunately, Mr. Sherman, and just across the board, they've identified the need to have that chief data officer. So working closely with our CDO is instrumental to make sure that we have appropriate data standards. We know how to data tag so we can then consume that information. So again, it's a overarching, it's almost like eating an elephant, but there is, fortunately, we have identified key steps in order to move forward. So one of them is leveraging ICAM in regards to identifying what kind of data is it, how's it associated to the user or to the entity, and then tagging it appropriately and making sure that it only gives access at the right time, the right place, and to the right service that's required. So yeah, it's a cohesive effort across the board. It's not, typically when we're talking about the data, at least, and protecting it, it requires not only the cybersecurity team members, we're working closely with our IE, with the information enterprise team members as well, to make sure that information enterprise architecture is that foundational piece is there so that we can lay on the cybersecurity as well.
Yeah, and I definitely appreciate the, it's about the data. I had a colleague, and that was he used to tell us, actually, he was a boss, and he was like, it's about the data, stupid. Like that's the thing that's most important or most critical. And, and I love that you brought in, the data needs to understand, kind of almost in my mind, to be able to protect itself, right? It needs to understand who or what is trying to access it. It needs to understand some information about, geography, perhaps, of where that person's located, what authorizations and access that individual has. And so there's also a big identity piece on it. One of the things that concerns me and has always concerned me is around, our own workforce, and we have to trust our own workforce. And some people talk about zero trust, that is, I don't trust anyone, I don't trust my workforce. And what I think they really mean is that, our workforce, our people, they make mistakes occasionally. And so it's not that we don't trust them as being part of the team, but we can't always trust their actions and behaviors. And an outsider quickly looks like an insider if they get into our network. And so are there any particular things from an insider standpoint that your office is looking at, or thoughts that you have on how do we protect that information from either malicious insiders or just inadvertent, mistakes that our workforce and our employees may make?
So Grant, I love the fact that you kind of made sure that there's a differentiation or an understanding that not all insider threats, it's, based on malicious, right? So the premise should be that, insider threats, they don't really come to work, or, the ones that are non-malicious come in thinking that they're going to do something. I, for one story is like, whenever I start brand new, I try to see what excessive access do I have, right? Because you never know, it's role-based. And so we're moving towards an attribute-based. And so how do we make sure that one, unknowingly or unwillingly, we're giving too much access to a user? Having said that, there's, again, looking at, it goes back to zero trust, right? It's fundamental. And how do we make sure that, at least from an insider perspective, if there is an insider threat, well, if we could even look at zero trust, right? It's just a threat, right? Because right now we're looking internal, external, doesn't really matter. But how do we make sure that it's segmented to a point that it can't traverse, it's just focused in one small area? But specifically, when we really talk about the insider threat, one of the key things is that the department is working on a counter insider threat program. And so that's led beautifully through USDI. They've done a great job. And what's really good about this one, again, it's, when we think about all these threats and cyber, when we talk about cybersecurity, we're really at a point where we need to think, how do we, what are those key touch points with other areas, right? With the enterprise, with HR. So I'll talk about insider threat a bit. It's definitely, we have the technology. We can use the technology to kind of segment or minimize threats so that it's only the right access to the right entity. And I'll say entity because it could be persona, non-persona, and to the right services. But what's going to be beautiful about this is if we can actually align with the social behavior of the team members, right? So this is where AI comes in, and partner closely with HR so we have a better understanding about, like, maybe indicators in regards to potential threats that can come up. And that's one of the things that we're working on, is pulling in, working closely with Jake through General Groen and his team, and partnering up and finding out what can we leverage from an AI side, but then also working with HR to find out what other parameters or elements do we need to put in order to better secure our network from the insider threat.
Well, and I love the bringing in HR, and it really goes to having kind of a holistic situational awareness around our workforce, right? And, one of the things we've experienced over the last year, I'm clearly in my basement at my house, you're clearly in the Pentagon. However, we do have lots of people who are working from places that we haven't seen them work from before. And I think, over the last year, the whole idea of, where Grant normally access systems from has changed, and it changed rather drastically a little over a year ago for many organizations, DoD included, and certainly federal civilian agencies. And I think that has actually made it that while I might be in my, at my house in my basement this week, I could be someplace else next week and still, accessing the same systems and trying to access data and information. And so I just think there's this, COVID-19 has brought another element of understanding the situational awareness about our employees and where they are and kind of how they're behaving. That's just important and undoubtedly has added another layer of challenge to what you guys are working with.
Yeah. Okay. I think, again, I will see this as an opportunity, right? So COVID actually, one, it demonstrated how fast the department can move in order to support its huge workforce, right? And during a pandemic. But the other thing too, it's that opportunity of really bringing us into the 21st century, right? The norm, the new norm of the working environment. But the one thing I do want to state is in regards to the workforce again. So they're key. Our jewels, our crown jewels are the workforce. And so having said that, Mr. Sherman is kicking off a cybersecurity workforce strategy to address what's the new, what are the new skills, the talents that are required to take the department into that new endeavor, which is that from a zero trust side and above. So that's one of the key, another key effort that's going on within the department.
As part of the focusing on the workforce and the focusing on flexibilities that we've had to incorporate, it seems to me that there must be some drive to move more data actually into unclassified networks and systems and expose data so that people like me who are working from their house can still get access and so that the workforce can be as productive as possible. Are you seeing some of those shifts of data moving in that direction? And I guess, do you have any concerns associated with that? Obviously, it reinforces the need for zero trust, but do you have any other concerns?
Yeah, so, I don't know if you brought this up. So again, we have executive order, and the various different efforts going across not only the department, but industry when it comes to data. But from an NDA's perspective, from a National Defense Authorization Act, also there's the big data platform discussion. And so if there's any concern, it would have been how is the department cohesively moving towards that BDP strategy in order to consume that data and make sure that the analytics can be done and key actions can be taken in a near real time. I'll go back to what I stated earlier about the time frame, the opportune time frame. So what initially I think maybe a year or 2 years ago, it would have been different. But what we see right now when it comes to BDP, you see a coalition of partnership between joint staff with CIO, cybercom, and the MilDeps, the services, to actually really think cohesively, how do we want to deal with the data? How are we going to determine what kind of data is consumable, which is, in order to determine what actions to take and which ones can be discarded or placed somewhere else. But yeah, that is a concern. But at the same time, again, that movement or what I've seen, the change in culture, I think that's what I'll say about it. So that change in culture is happening. And again, it's happening from the top ranks down. And that is, I want to make sure we maintain that momentum. And so that's going to be key, right? It's just like for zero trust, I don't want that just to be that buzzword. It's really taking it through and running it through the implementation. So that's going to be key. Again, with the leadership that we have in place, we have the advocacy and support. So we're going to just ride it as long as we can.
No, I think that's really important. And you're right. We certainly, zero trust is a buzzword, right? I mean, I don't think we can go phrase. We can't get away from that. However, it's really what do we go do with it, right? How do we implement and how do we use it to be something beyond a buzzword and really drive it home in a way? One of the things I recognize, and having spent a lot of time in DoD and then time in the federal civilian space at OMB overseeing federal agencies, civilian agencies, often, and I mentioned this earlier, there's a pointing towards DoD and using DoD as a bit of a guidepost. I guess, do you have recommendations for your counterparts at federal civilian agencies that may be looking at how they can implement and best protect, their high value assets, which is kind of how they classify their most sensitive data and information. But any thoughts or recommendations as they're building out their architectures and trying to move towards this direction as well?
Yeah, so I love that question, right? Because when I started off, I think there was like two key areas that I'm kind of focused in this role, which is the strategy and then the outreach. And so the notion here is that Zero Trust is, I mean, of course it's been out, but the actual implementation is kind of relatively new. We're still kind of learning through it. But I have, besides sharing the ZTRA before it was publicly releasable, sharing it with other federal agencies. And then we've also been sharing the ICAM reference design as well. But getting the feedback from them, that's key, right? So we can share it. But what's been great is that they've been very active in providing their recommendations, changes, or identifying scenarios or use cases that we'd never considered. And one of the key things moving forward is I'm very interested in finding out what is industry doing, right? So if I go into industry, they could say, hey, we've already executed or implemented ZT, and it's understanding what, from what aspect. From the other federal agencies, it's the same way. So one of the things I have been doing is, again, having the cybersecurity reference architecture offsite. It's bringing together team members from across the federal agencies to actually sit down and really think about various different use cases and what gaps and seams are currently there and what can we learn from each other. I've learned a lot from the Intel community in regards to some of their use cases. Working with DHS is going to be the same, but industry is a one area too where I think that's one sweet spot which we can really maximize and collaborate in.
Yeah, no, it is definitely a two-way street on learning, and I liked what you said about really when someone says they've implemented Zero Trust. The question I always ask, whether someone says they have a Zero Trust tool or they've implemented it, is please define Zero Trust to me, because I don't think it's just too broad of a concept and an idea for someone to have a singular solution, and the more granular and the more specific we can get, I think the better. Yeah. So anything that you want to add to the audience, or, I guess maybe I'll phrase it this way, what keeps you up at night that you think others should be worrying about as well, whether it keeps them up at night or not?
Yeah, so there's two actually. The first one, which I know my team members, they roll their eyes every time I say this, is how does it all fit together? Right, is as we're moving fast, because of course we want to move fast, and especially when there's a compromise or an incident that happens and there's multiple pieces moving. But I think it's imperative that we understand collectively and from a department perspective how everything fits together. So if something falls short, what are the risks or issues that we're going to have? But the other one too, it's how do I make sure that cybersecurity reference architecture is agile and threat informed? And so the agility part is important, right? So we have this a continuously evolving landscape. So how do we make sure that architecture remains relevant and can be leveraged as that blueprint across the board? I know I said two, but there's another one too, and it's that alignment with industry. So again, a key stakeholder for the department is industry, is our DIB partners. And so how do we make sure that there is that alignment from that cybersecurity architecture perspective? And there's one of the key things is there is an NDA 1736, which talks about the DIB cybersecurity architectures for sensors. And so as we're working on our big data platform and identifying where to best place the sensors, how are we working with the DIB, or, what point do we engage? So those are the things that kind of keep me up at night, is how do I make sure that reference or that cybersecurity blueprint remains agile, up to date, and is consumable by the key stakeholders. And the other one is how do we make sure that we are aligned with our DIB partners, because again, we're key team members, and it's going to be imperative. But Having said that, I really appreciate the time. I appreciate the opportunity that Venable provided for me to share some of my thoughts in regards to how we're moving towards that zero trust construct. Again, having the visibility and definitely the direct tasking from leadership down about the importance of zero trust is imperative, and that collaboration with industry too. So I really appreciate, I think this, unfortunately, can't, it's not in person, but, as we move past this pandemic, I look forward to future events. But once again, thank you so much, Grant.
No, Sudha, thank you so much. I really appreciate your insight. Definitely appreciate your time, and I look forward to getting to meet you in person, and certainly, at some future in-person event. And I think you've got, just great guidance that the whole audience can take away, because everyone's got to work with their vendor community, right? Wherever you're at, everyone's got dependencies on some other entity. So again, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. And again, Sudha Vias, the Chief Cybersecurity Architect for the Department of Defense. And I'll be curious to see if we start seeing, other departments and agencies creating a Chief Cybersecurity Architect position. So thank you and have a great afternoon.
All right,
Ross, back to you. Thank
you, Grant. I appreciate it. And thank you to Sudha Vias. I saw some questions come in late. I apologize we couldn't get to those with her. If there's a chance to follow up, we absolutely will. Mindful of time, I know that was a great conversation. And look, I want to really reinforce what I heard there, which is there's some interesting areas around insider risk that are going to deal with some of the cultures of the organizations that have to be taken into account. Hopefully we can get into more of that in the panel discussion. So not to take away any of the thunder, let me introduce the moderator for the panel. We're Jamie Danker from Venable. She just joined Venable. This is her first time with us, speaking live publicly. So it's a treat to have her. She just quick background on Jamie. Jamie's been in federal government for many years. She was the Chief Privacy Officer for NPPD, which is now CISA, and she's held many other positions. She also worked very closely with NIST to develop and release the NIST privacy framework. She's got a storied history in both privacy and cybersecurity, and she's kind of sits at the nexus of what we're looking at when we talk about how to take into account some of the insider risks that we're dealing with today. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jamie and the rest of the panel. If the rest of the panel could turn their cameras and mics on, we'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Ross, for that introduction. I'm really excited to be here as my first appearance as a Venable employee and to be here with my illustrious panelists. It was a great keynote. There are so many topics I think we're going to want to springboard off of. But before we do that, I think it's worth kind of resetting the stage before I let the panelists introduce themselves. So I think we all know that we have some external factors that have changed the way government handles its data. As everyone knows, COVID's really caused a shift in how we work, moving many offices to either full-time or part-time telework. And even with things starting to open up, I don't think we're going to see we're going to see this trend stay for quite a while, I think. So the virtualized workforce requires more information to be shared using online collaboration platforms and places increased importance on how employees safeguard sensitive information. And then other factors that we heard touched upon by all the speakers are driven by the new administration. The new cybersecurity executive order has tasked agencies to advance zero trust architecture and secure cloud architectures. And since the OPM breach, and it's interesting to even think about the OPM breach, I know when I was at Homeland Security for 10 years in the DHS privacy enterprise, started my stint at NPPD when the OPM data breach happened. That happened over 6 years ago. And we've seen the government take stock of the data that exists on unclassified networks. So with the proliferation of digital information, the amount of sensitive materials on unclassified networks has increased significantly. So that leads us to our topic today. How do we protect this sensitive data from the risks associated from insider activity? And I think a really important point made by all of our previous speakers is that insider activity is sometimes intentional and sometimes it's unintentional. So I hope we can kind of dig into that a little bit too. So we're lucky to have unique perspectives on our panel from the Department of Justice, the Department of Homeland Security, the FDIC, and Code 42. We'll cover the current challenges that insider risk programs face, best practices to ensure privacy, a particular favorite of mine, but I won't favor it too much, and then how these programs should be set up and managed from a governance perspective. So with that, let me turn it over to the panelists for quick introductions. And Tommy, we'll go ahead and start with you.
Sorry about that. My name is Tommy Todd. I'm the Vice President of Security at Code 42. I've been in cybersecurity now for a little over 20 years, focused primarily on data privacy and data protection. So happy to be here.
Thanks, John. Let's go over to you.
Good afternoon. I'm John Miles. I'm team lead for the Department of Justice Insider Threat Prevention and Detection Program and Justice Management Division Insider Threat Center. I've been working in this space for about close to 10 years now.
Thank you. Zach.
Sure. Pardon me. Thanks for having us today. I'm Zach Brown, the Chief Information Security Officer at the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation.
Great. And Scott.
Hi, Scott Matthews. I am the Senior Advisor to the Deputy Chief Privacy Officer at the Department of Homeland Security. I've been doing insider threat oversight for about 10 years and been in the privacy community a little longer than that.
Great, thanks, Scott. Okay, I'm going to dive in. I've got a lot of questions for our panelists here today. For those watching in the audience, we'll be monitoring the chat for questions. Hopefully we can get to some of them. But I'm going to start, this is a question for all panelists, but Tommy, I'm going to ask you to take a stab at it first. So given the breadth and scope of the shift to virtual environments, how have approaches to mitigating insider risk changed?
Yeah, and that's actually a really great question. And one of the challenges that we're seeing in the industry is with this work from home condition is that a lot of the traditional data protection strategies that were normal when we were in the office have no longer have the same kind of efficacy. There's a lot of different elements associated with work from home that we're not used to from a security practitioner perspective. Things like endpoints becoming communal devices in the home where you have a situation where you have unauthorized access to corporate devices. And the amount of data that's being generated and the need for additional collaboration has definitely created a massive problem with data sprawl. So being able to have the proper visibility into how data is being handled in this remote world has definitely been challenging for a lot of organizations. And I think from a positioning perspective, when you think about what do we need to do to change, like what have we done to kind of augment some of these concerns, I think we have to step away from just looking at specific types of data and only focusing on that and actually encompassing all data because it all really matters at the end of the day. And you really don't know what you don't know. So if you're only focusing in on specific types, you're missing everything else and potentially putting data at risk.
John, your thoughts on the question?
Yeah, so as the workplace changed, we're looking to ensure that third-party vendors provide visibility to the data at transit and arrest and who is accessing the department's data. We started implementing tools to ensure identification and appropriate privileges and access of employees and cloud-based vendors supporting the department. The way we collect and store data from the endpoints, we're leveraging more network security tools to supplement the UAM tools for inspecting and storing data. We're also decreasing the intervals of our security tools, especially our UAM clients, for sending logs back to the consoles to prevent data loss and circumvention, and reconfiguring our tool sets to incorporate more source identifiers as possible. This has increased the processing time and bandwidth used, but has reduced the time for correlating and identifying the originating source due to the dynamic nature of virtual environments. It's really about getting the data back as quickly to our stationary system so we can actually parse through it and look through it as these data sit on these virtual environments. And that's how we've really changed the way we approach this.
Okay, and Zach, what about at the FDIC?
Sure. So the FDIC in normal times, let's call them that, we have a fairly distributed workforce as it is. So the transition to the fully remote or virtual environment meant that really the process and mechanisms that we had in place and that we use in for the normal remote population, now we need to apply and scale to the entire agency. So from a tools and automation standpoint, we've already pushed a lot of security protections to the endpoints. We already do a lot of the monitoring as if it were to account for and accommodate that remote workforce. But so geography wasn't so much a factor on that side, but when it came to that full life cycle of a user's life cycle of an employee, and it came time to say collect equipment, devices, or badges in a hurry, that's where we ran into some issues now because folks are sitting at home. So that turned our emphasis or our attention towards how to quickly and most effectively render those devices or accounts or credentials useless for all intents and purposes. That practice, obviously, when we're all in the same office or in the same building, can send a guard down or in the extreme situations and do what you need to do to mitigate that risk. But so anyways, those sorts of things we put into place. We also turned, I guess immediately when we went into the telework phase, and Sudha touched on earlier, the distinction between the bad actors, the malicious insider, and the unwitting insider. And so now we have 100% of our workforce working in a home office or sometimes a dining room table, or that's also doubling as a school classroom or what have you. And so we turned a lot of our attention and emphasis towards the unwitting insider. So amping up on insider or training and awareness, messaging and guidance to improve the individual user's awareness to that new work environment. Kind of just be aware of your surroundings, know how to handle now in your home hard copy information, how to dispose of that properly, and just general increase in situational awareness.
Thanks. And Scott, now I know you come to this topic from a slightly different perspective, more of an oversight perspective, but do you have any comments on how moving to a virtual environment changed practices at DHS?
Sure. So, in addition to the privacy aspect, which I'll get to in just a second, I mean, the main thing is, everybody has government furnished equipment. Everybody uses a VPN, to get remote access. So, the agents are installed on the government furnished equipment. If someone tries to use personal email, either receiving or sending from their GFE, then it's automatically flagged as coming from an outside source. So, some of those protections, they're already, well in place, and it didn't make a whole lot of difference whether they were in the office or at home, because they're using the same laptop in both cases. Where the issue is a little different, though, and I think, maybe Zach referred to this a bit, was people are at home now, so they operate differently. They don't have the same mindset as they do when they're in the office. And so, in addition to all the things that happen surrounding someone, conversations that may be captured, it's policy, I think, probably in most agencies, to allow de minimis personal use of the government equipment. So, yes, that means you can't use webmail, at least at DHS, on your government equipment, but there are other things you can do. And so, my concern is that someone sitting at home with their laptop open is probably more likely to do some personal business on their government equipment than they would if they were in the office. So they don't make that kind of separation. So there's a lot of potentially privileged communications, financial, doctors, clergy, things of that sort that may take place. And that's very much the case if you have a workforce in uniform, but they may be also might be union activity. There's obviously the First Amendment related activity, which, of course, the Privacy Act, we can't collect on that under most circumstances. So I think that's probably where the biggest issue is on the behavior side, is that people just will behave differently on their computer at home than they would at work.
Interesting. Tommy, I feel like you have some things to say, so please share.
Yeah, these are really great points. And Scott, I just want to kind of emphasize something that you mentioned about the employee experience when it comes to work from home. This is a relatively new phenomenon for quite a few people. And what we've seen out of the studies that have come out of this whole work from home environment is that a couple of things. One, productivity has increased by at least 15% by having people at home. You know, there's no more of a commute. You don't have the distractions at lunch and all these other things. What's also interesting to note, though, is that the employee work streams have dramatically changed as well. So in the past, we used to have employees that would come in at 8 in the morning and leave at 5 o'clock. That was their work day. Now that we're technically living at work, as I like to call it, we feel compelled to work whenever we want to work. So if that means 3 a.m. on a Saturday, that's what I'm going to do, right? And in some cases, the distractions in the home with the whole family being there means that that might be the only time I can work in peace when everybody else is asleep. So from a security perspective, it's definitely changed the behavioral patterns for employees and what to look for from a risk indicators perspective. And it's made it a little more challenging due to the nature of the employee work streams. At the end of the day, what we like to say is employees want to work the way they want to work, when they want to work, and how they want to work. And that also means that the tools that they want to use to be able to collaborate might be against corporate policies or the policies that we've set in front of them, and saying that these are the sanctioned solutions you need to use, and we shouldn't expect you to see anything else. But again, to remain productive, sometimes employees will try to circumvent that policy. So a lot of good points there.
Great. I'm going to move on to the next question, but John, I saw a lot of head nodding there. So if you want to add any flavor to some of your fellow panelists' responses before you answer this question, feel free to do so. So with more and more attention being paid to the sensitive information on unclassified networks, how have your approaches to monitoring insider risk changed? And if you could share, what are some of the biggest challenges you faced implementing the programs?
Who you want to start with, me?
Yes.
Okay. So first of all, I want to concur with Tommy's statement and the way the work environment has changed with virtual environments and people changing the way we set up our security posture and restrictions and guidelines, because as people work from home, they kind of work during their own time and pace, and a lot of the rules and regulations that we had in place before have gone by the wayside, so we have to revamp those and do new ones. Now to answer the other question, the department approach has pretty much remained the same. We base it on the Executive Order 3587, which clearly states that the agency shall implement insider threat monitoring of cleared individuals. We know the Insider Threat Task Force hints that cleared individuals are the baseline and not the ceiling. However, this is not explicitly stated in the executive order. The department has done a great job in meeting all the requirements for securing and monitoring classified systems. But with that said, the department is battling the issue of insider threat monitoring on unclassified networks because a significant portion of the department's sensitive data is worked and handled on the unclassified networks by unclassified personnel. So the department is working with our General Counsel Office, our Privacy and Civil Liberties Office to develop processes, requirements, and restrictions to monitor if we decide to expand the policy to non-cleared personnel with elevated privileges and access to high-valued assets. With that said, the department has entities in place to handle non-cleared employee violations. The insider threat current role is to ensure that these program data is not siloed, but is distributed to the units that should have that information. However, because the employee is not cleared, our insider threat program is restricted from doing a deep dive on that individual employee and giving those entities all the information they may need.
Thanks. I actually want to go, Scott, to you next, because I think you have a really interesting perspective here. Did a little research on my former home agency, and Homeland Security's Privacy Office puts out a lot of privacy impact assessments, which provide a lot of transparency to the public, not only about privacy practices, but the programs themselves. So I did notice that DHS expanded its insider threat program to the unclassified networks. And I wonder if you could kind of just provide some highlights on what was the process to move from the classified space to the unclass side.
Sure. And, I guess the thing to say, first of all, is this was really an evolutionary process. We started off with just looking at JWICs, our classified network, and of course, only people with clearances. Then we went, of course, and added in CIPRNet to cover the secret network. And again, people with clearances for secret level. But I think the main consideration was the concern that people have all networks at their workstation. So it's really easy if you're working on a classified network to just kind of take it, look at a document, read it, and retype it on your unclassified system. So if you're looking just at only from the standpoint of leaking information, not covering cleared personnel on unclassified networks means you're leaving the door wide open. So that was the next step for us, was expanding just for the cleared personnel on the unclassified networks. And then way back in 2015, a decision was made that we all in leadership had a role in on expanding coverage to basically all threats to DHS and to the workforce. So all systems, all facilities, all networks, all personnel. And this really came after the Navy Yard shooting. And so looking at threats we might see, even self-harm, workplace violence, anything along those lines. So we did publish each step along the way. We published a privacy impact assessment. We had to revise the systems of record notice so that it was clear that we were expanding to a different population and that we were looking for different indicators of risk that covered things other than just leaking classified information. So, I think part of it's been successful. There's no question about that. We have a very solid governance model that allows my office and other oversight offices to see exactly what's happening as it's happening, to review cases before they go forward, things of that sort. So it has worked quite well, I think, going out to the unclassified network and trying to cover the various issues, trying to write different triggers or different policies for user activity monitoring becomes much more difficult when you're looking at issues that, again, could be very personal, could be First Amendment related, could be medical, things of that sort. So it is a much greater challenge, but luckily our Insider Threat Program and the oversight offices have a very good relationship. All the triggers have to be approved by the oversight offices before they can be used, and we have very robust discussions to make sure we don't capture the wrong thing. But yeah, doing again is evolutionary, starting off just with classified cleared and moving to the different networks over a period of several years, and now being basically on all networks for all personnel. We had a chance to kind of fix the bugs along the way, rather than trying to just implement everything immediately.
Thanks, Scott. I think it's a really interesting, unique perspective, and not many people know that DHS does publish a lot of information about these privacy-sensitive programs. So I would encourage folks to visit the DHS privacy website, download the privacy impact assessment. You can even download the memo, I think, that the Secretary signed authorizing the expansion of insider threat to the unclassified network space. And you touched on some of the governance issues, which I think we're going to try to hit a little bit later on, so hold on to some of those thoughts. But I want to make sure we get to Zach as well, and I'll repeat the question. With more and more attention being paid to the sensitive information on unclassified networks, how have your approaches to monitoring insider risk changed, and what are some of the biggest challenges you have faced implementing these programs?
Sure. So the vast majority of our work is actually done in the unclass space. So our interactions internally, but also with our external partners and regulated entities that's all unclassified. So I'll go ahead and jump to the challenge, because I think this is this is probably common to a lot of kind of sister agencies, peer agencies that I've worked with, and conversations we've had leading up to this point. Is just, how do you then, without that clear mandate or stipulation around classified, how do you then make sure that you're appropriately sizing and scoping your insider threat program for an unclassified space? So right sizing the program for us meant we went looking for and didn't have great success in finding basically a lot of benchmarking information. What do other agencies do? What do private sector organizations do? Who are some industry leaders? Who are some government leaders in this space? And then, once you accumulate and compile all that information, start synthesizing for our own unique agency needs and perspective. That then turned to, where does our risk lie? What should the scope and size and definition for our insider threat program be? What is it that we're exactly trying to target and mitigate? And so that led into actually some very worthwhile, and they continue on today, conversations. And actually, I feel like this is kind of an intersection of a lot of topics that we're touching on today, is, the intersection of an emphasis for the need for more robust and reliable data governance practices, data tagging, Suda mentioned earlier, a robust and stable identity access management program, those data sources also. So starting to appreciate and recognize the interdependency between things that, have long since been part of a cyber program, like least privilege, need to know, then working with your business partners in the unclass space in particular, where there aren't distinct classifications, but instead nuanced and specific sensitivities around the business information that they work with each day. And then, you apply that broader insider risk lens, and now we're considering the upstream activities like personnel screening, background investigations, physical access controls, onboarding and offboarding of individuals, of data. So all of this kind of ties together. I'd love to say we've got it all wrapped up and in a nice bow to share with others, our successes, but this really is it's a work in progress. It's in a state of continuous improvement, but all in all, I keep coming back to, it is an end-to-end, life cycle approach to implementing this program. It's never quite finished.
Thanks, Zach. Tommy, I wonder if you could add a little perspective here. How are you, kind of springboarding off some of Zach's points, how are you seeing customers scope or sort of right-size their insider risk programs?
Yeah, I think it's important to note there's a couple of different factors involved, and I think everything starts with policies, right? And making sure that everybody understands what classified from unclassified truly means, and then having the mechanisms to verify that those policies are being enforced and being followed properly. Where that breaks down for a lot of organizations is in the ability to have visibility around the data and where it's going, which networks does it sit on, where's it been, where's it going, who's had access to it, and it all comes down to a couple of things. One is contextual information, being able to have the right amount of context when you see these events to be able to do something about them. So the who, the what, the when, the where, the how, all that's important information to understand. But also data lifecycle, being able to see the full lifecycle as files are created and moved throughout the organization, where it's going. Did it move from a classified to an unclassified network? Where did it start its life at, and where did it end at? All of this information is important in understanding, do we have policies that are enforceable? Are they backed up by our technology? And if not, where are our gaps that we need to be able to address? So.
Thanks. I'm going to move on to the next question. We're going to talk a little bit about the new cybersecurity executive order. And I'm going to pose this question first to Zach, and then anyone else who wants to jump in on it. So the recent cybersecurity executive order put a lot of focus on moving IT systems to the cloud and re-architecting environments to embrace zero trust, which I just learned that that's a new acronym, ZT. So I want to sound cool with the buzzword and make it an acronym. To embrace ZT practices of identity management and data encryption at rest and in motion. Has this shift, especially at the agency level, bolstered monitoring for insider threats or data loss prevention on unclassified networks?
Sure. So you're right. The executive order does put a lot of focus on, I'll use the acronym too, on ZT, on the transition to cloud, on identity access management, data encryption, which is great. As for a shift, I think I'd probably characterize it as a renewed focus on some of this work. Many of the things on the list are, and for some time have been part of a cybersecurity program, at least within the federal government, cyber programs or the general kind of the broader IT program. At this point, most of us have some semblance of an ICAM program. We have data encryption policies, practices, by now a cloud strategy, migration plan, either some business systems or even some core IT out in these cloud platforms. Zero trust is probably the newest addition to the conversation, but really the underlying concepts and principles, I think we've all agreed here, aren't new. This is stuff we've been relying on for some time. So as it pertains to the executive order, what these EOs and memos and legislative changes tend to bring momentum, really, first and foremost, a sort of all hands on deck approach, raising visibility, driving action in each of the areas. and not just these, but in improving contract language, driving information sharing, addressing supply chain risk head on at the source, no pun intended. And the momentum applied appropriately should provide a big boost to a lot of these programs. So selfishly maybe, or I'm excited because the EO lends itself to improving the greater cyber mission and a lot of these objectives that, as I say, we've been working on for several years. So we'll be kind of the cyber aspect of cyber mission will be kind of the key beneficiary, if you will, to the EO. And similarly, the monitoring and data loss prevention capabilities that you asked about, they're likely to benefit from the work, kind of the downstream work of the EO. When we talk about zero trust, ICAM, data encryption, data management, they're all working towards and have kind of similar objectives in that we need to establish accurate and authoritative data points, sources of that information within the organization. And like in most things, the better the source data is, the better the outcome, better results, and better the activities around that will be. So as those data sources become more robust, that enables our monitoring to grow more efficient, response actions to be more effective. The same is true of data loss prevention. Proper data governance, robust data tagging, full accounting of the organization's data inventory, all necessary to then tune and refine data loss prevention. So then wrapping that all up into what's now ZT, I'll probably borrow some talking points from another federal program, but we need to know what's on the network, who's on the network. We need to understand those are now entities in a ZT world, understand how they should be interacting, how they shouldn't be interacting, then taking all of that information, applying it to then better tune your architecture, your interactions with your cloud providers, those sorts of things, and then policies and tooling to enforce, and then continuously, and I'll continue to harp on this, it's a continuous effort to refine the model and your process accordingly.
Thanks, Zach. That was a super comprehensive answer. I don't know, do any of the other panelists want to add or follow that? No.
I've got one comment, just that may be general. So the use of zero trust as a label. One thing I'm somewhat cautious about is how people might be translating that from zero trust in terms of equipment on the network to zero trust in your people. And the importance of making it very clear that we're not talking about not trusting our employees and looking over the shoulder constantly because we don't trust them. But we're talking about zero trust from more of a technology standpoint, and I think making that very clear, because transparency with your employees and having complete buy-in from the employees is absolutely critical to this working. So if we don't make it clear that we do trust our employees, that's the reason we hire them, we trust them, it's not going to be very helpful. So not quite on the question, but just a thought.
So I have more questions here, but I just want to encourage all the viewers, if you have questions, to throw them up there so I can put them up for the panelists. We still have a little bit more time left. But next I'm going to go to Tommy. People often equate insider threat programs and tools with being used to catch spies, terrorists, and other bad actors inside organizations. Basically, a program catching bad people intentionally doing bad things. Can you share some other use cases based on the customers you've worked with?
Yeah, I think it's important to make a distinction too. I know we've been using the phrase insider threat quite frequently on this panel. There's another way to look at it. We like to talk about insider risk rather than insider threats. And there's a very distinct reason for that. When we think about threats, we think about that 1% of malicious users that might exist in your organization. We put a lot of energy and cycles towards remediating that particular issue. But the reality is that insider risk applies to all of us. We all have the burden of potentially putting data at risk. And therefore, when we think about program development, we need to have all users and all data into consideration. And also, as Scott mentioned, we don't necessarily want to mistrust our employees. We hired them to do a job. We trust that they came in to do that job, but we need a way to verify that all the handling activities around data are being done appropriately. And so when you position yourself in a motion where you're looking at it from this isn't the enemy for me, this is really just human nature, right? We're prone to make mistakes, and that's okay. I think the recent study showed that over 80% of the exfiltration that we've seen, or the exposure that we've seen, was unintentional or due to carelessness. These aren't people that are out to do harm. They're just either being a little lazy in their activities, or potentially they don't have the right level of training on how to use the tools to do collaboration correctly without putting the data at risk. So, when you take a different approach and you look at it from that perspective, it makes it a much easier way to address it, because now it's less about the employees and my trust that I have in them, and it's all about the data. If you're not going to trust anything, don't trust the data, right? Follow the data. There's really no reason for cybersecurity to exist if it wasn't for protecting the data. That's what you care about the most. So it's a little bit of a different strategy than what people might be used to, but it's definitely a difference between how we perceive our employees and how we perceive data.
Yeah, I'm sure others on this panel have thoughts. Any other use cases or success stories you would add?
Yes, I definitely would like to add on to that. Especially within the department, insider threat is often viewed as only protecting the data from bad actors, which Tommy has stated. But we are responsible for protecting our people too. And a lot of times that is missed. Well, I consider one of our greatest success stories is that we had an employee who was contemplating suicide. And because we were able to see that, we got them the resources that they needed to get them off of that path. A lot of our employees don't know that the department has a breadth of resources to help them out with a lot of different problems. And one of the goals for us is to make sure that we get those individuals, if they need help or need those resources, to those particular entities within the department that can help them. So I do like to point that out, that we're not here just to collect bad guys, but we're here to protect our people as well.
Scott or Zach?
Yeah, I'll just add a little bit. Love the distinction between insider threat and internal risk, realizing that activity and the work around it has shifted really in both terminology, but also in branding and in focus. We need to be sure that it's seen and appreciated as a risk management activity. I know a lot of programs, and frankly, to Scott's point earlier on, zero trust and the perception that carries with it, and insider threat as well. It does put kind of people on their heels when they first hear it, and they think, oh man, here's this private and secret organization that's behind some closed door somewhere. And we want to change that, I think, for the betterment of the programs, and really getting back to the spirit and intent of why we have these internal risk programs. Is you want to emphasize and hope that people realize and appreciate the value that the program brings to the organization. It should be seen as a net positive. It does help to provide for and contribute to the workforce safety and the workplace safety that John mentioned. It also helps us to helps to minimize and I feel like we've kind of beat this one, but helps to minimize the impact of the unwitting insider. We don't want people to be afraid of reporting. Cyber, we've struggled with this for some time, where folks don't want to report an incident because they don't want to get someone in trouble. So you carry those same concepts and that same thought process into the internal risk space. And we want to be sure that folks are able to identify and aware of the indicators, aware of potential risk scenarios, that then they can feel comfortable reporting it to a group or to a program that's going to take the appropriate action.
Yeah,
for success stories, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead,
Scott. And then Tommy.
Okay, so success stories, probably the most well-known one is Lieutenant Hassan from the Coast Guard, the white supremacist who was, first indications came about through user activity monitoring. And really because the analyst was on his toes, was curious and followed what looked like initially to be a path that wasn't going anywhere, but after a lot of analysis, realized that this was something big, and it was. I mean, this is someone who had hit lists on their Excel spreadsheets on their work computer, which is one of the other things I think is always funny is how much people do on systems that have banners saying you are being monitored. You know you're being monitored, but they do it anyway. We, similar to John's example, we did have a person who showed indications of threatening self-harm, and we were able to get that person assistance, before anything happened. And I think that's one of the critical things in messaging this to the workforce is that we're not playing gotcha. We're not trying to catch you when you made a mistake. We're trying to keep you from making a mistake, and we're trying to help you before you make that mistake. So finding something early on before it gets big, I think that's a critical message to send, is that it's, again, trying to help keep you from getting in trouble rather than catch you and get you in trouble.
I feel like, Tommy, you want to jump in here.
Yeah, just put a finer point on some of the things that have already been mentioned around, if you see something, say something, right? That whole idea around, you don't necessarily want your employees to be snitches, but you definitely want them to be part of the story rather than a consequence of security. And probably the cultural utopia that we all strive to get towards is the amount of transparency between security and employees to where they trust each other enough that when employees make mistakes or they potentially put data at risk, they give you a heads up. They let you know when these things happen. They're not ashamed of those mistakes. And it all really comes down to how security approaches how they make users aware through education and their transparency. Culturally speaking, as an example, I've heard of organizations that have told me, look, our security team is open, right? We have an open door policy. You want to know how we implement our monitoring? Come ask us and we'll tell you. We'll be happy to do that. Because they understand that employees are that first line of defense. They're your human firewall towards data exposure and the potential risk that puts the organization in. And the more you can have this collaboration between security and the employees, the more trust that gets developed, and the more that we all feel like we're working towards the same goal, right? We all take security responsibly, and we want to make sure that we all look at data the same way. So I think it's critical that all these points have been made that, when it comes to success stories, the best thing we can have is somebody that's an ally to security rather than a consequence.
It's funny that you say about see something, say something, because I actually wrote that into the message that our secretary sent to the workforce, saying that if we're asking the rest of America to see something, say something, we have to also be able to ask it of our own workforce. So yeah, that's a message that we've tried to bring into Insider Threat as well.
That's great little anecdote there. So we have about 10 minutes left, and I want to make sure that we hit on governance and oversight. So Zach and Scott, I'm going to be asking the next questions to you and hopefully get in one last question before we close things out here. So Zach, FDIC is a great example of an organization that does not operate for the most part on classified networks. However, in many instances, it has access to and keeps track of very sensitive data. What steps do you take from a governance and procedure perspective to identify anomalous behavior and prevent the loss of sensitive information?
Sure. I love that question because, usually the conversation around monitoring and identifying anomalous behavior, preventing loss of sensitive information usually jumps to a tools discussion. So focusing on the governance and procedure has really been, in the beginning, almost a struggle really, because you got to kind of grab the reins of that tool discussion and say, well, the market is rich with UAB tools and data loss prevention tools. They have tremendous capability. They do exactly what they're designed to do. But if you don't have that governance in place, the tools can create more damage or more harm than provide good. So, you have to consider that most of these systems nowadays, as they're designed, as they're intended to be used, they'll be ingesting information from system security logs, physical access logs, sometimes HR data, personnel security data, all cooking into this recipe wrought for, now you have this tool that's guaranteed to trigger, frankly, on some predefined rule or logic that says this data point plus this data point plus this data point alerts to this is a high risk event or a high risk individual or what have you. Then what? Then what does the organization do? If we haven't answered that question ahead of time, just pause on the tool and get that governance process in place. you have, the let's say Bill, who has a security clearance, working late on a project, working nights and weekends, pulling in more data than he normally would. Those are all going to trigger alerts just in your SIM, your security tools. But then you add to the fact that, Bill has also been through a recent divorce, custody matter. He's got his paycheck was just garnished. If all that information is feeding into one system, now is he an insider threat? Is Bill a person of interest? Is there a report now that has Bill's name tagged with some label that or dashboard that's being monitored, and then that gets reported through some work group? All of that feeding into some escalation process and some determination or analysis leading up to determination. Without sound logic, that could be a recipe for disaster. So is Bill then fired? Is he suspended? Is he subjected to additional or targeted monitoring? These are just just a couple of questions that you need to think and plan into the organization's governance process, so that you have these playbooks established, you have these questions answered, and you know exactly in a standardized and specific way who to involve, when to involve them. Rely on your hub with the different subject matter experts from the different elements in the organization to really construct and formulate the best possible and the most appropriate action for the agency to take.
All right. So Scott, I have an adjacent question to you. And I think, again, selfishly, I think privacy pros sometimes offer the most unique perspective because you're providing sort of oversight, guidance, but that also means you have to really understand the program inside and out. So I think you can kind of comment on all these questions, but add that layer of what you do from an oversight perspective. So you sort of watch the watchers in that respect. And as privacy officers, your team works to make sure people are not compromising the privacy of DHS employees while still enabling employees to do their jobs. What are the best practices you've seen from a governance and procedure perspective? And how do you thread the needle given some of your sensitive missions? You've got Coast Guard, intelligence and analysis, science and technology, CISA, among others like TSA and Customs and Border Protection. What is your process, and what is your process for sort of developing those privacy triggers?
So I guess we were fortunate, back with when WikiLeaks, first became an issue back in 2011, when we started to form an insider threat program, we also at the same time created an insider threat oversight group, or we call it the ITOG. And the insider threat oversight group has representatives from General Counsel, Privacy Office, which is me, and our Office of Civil Rights and Civil Liberties. Every trigger, every policy, every SOP, directive, instruction, communication to employees has to go through the Insider Threat Oversight Group and be approved. So if we are expanding into an area like DVE, domestic violent extremism, and looking for issues there, or QAnon, all those triggers, policies have to go through us first before they can be used. If there is going to be anything beyond a preliminary inquiry, then it has to go through counsel to make sure that it's done appropriately. Any enhanced user activity monitoring where it's 24/7 on the person has to be approved by the oversight group. So we've put a lot of, some would say, barriers in the way. I would say it's a lot of oversight, and actually we have a very close working relationship with the Insider Threat Program that's really cooperative, and they look at our oversight as protecting them and protecting the program so that their analysts don't get in trouble. The other things that we have no announced audits, so no prior notice, we just do it. And those of us on the Insider Threat Oversight Group went through the training that the company that provides the software gives to the analysts so that we could use the UAM software. We can write policies, we know how to do it. We all have login access, so anytime I want, I can log in and I can watch the watchers and see what they're doing live. So it's with the idea of providing advice, correction, not catching somebody doing something wrong, but better understanding what's going on. So to me, all of those are best practices. And I'd add really to what Jenny, to what you said, noting our privacy impact assessments, is a level of transparency. We make sure the system of record notice is accurate. Our privacy impact assessments can be 15, 20 pages long because they go through every single thing that is going on in the program. Whenever there's a change, it's communicated from our secretary to the entire workforce. If it's not a significant change, then it goes out from our CISO. But either way, it's that constant communication. So I think between the transparency and us having the oversight people having the same training that the insider threat analysts get to use the software, I think we're in a good position to provide oversight without getting in the way of the program itself.
Thanks, Scott. So we've got just a few minutes left. So I've got one last question, which of course I'm sure we could talk about for much, much longer, but I gather that, some of the recommendations from this group would be for including governance, oversight, privacy, et cetera. But Tommy, I'll throw this question out to you and see if others want to add on. So if the Office of Management and Budget were to consider updating guidance on including insider threat programs on unclassified networks, what are the key elements they should keep in mind and consider?
Yeah, so when we think about things like insider risk and insider risk management specifically, it is a programmatic approach to how you deal with data exposure. In other words, it's a people, process, technology approach. And when it comes to the tech itself, you want to make sure that you're looking at solutions that can provide you the visibility within the data movement of all data, not just specific types of data. Because if you have these blind spots, you're going to put yourself in a position where you might have unacceptable risk. The output of these solutions should provide you with policy validation. So as you build policies around how data should be handled on your unclassified network, you need to be able to verify that and back that up with a certain type of visibility. And then the output of these solutions should really help with the education and awareness process. As employees continue to move data around, as the need for collaboration continues to increase, they need to be made aware when they're putting data at risk, either intentionally or unintentionally, and then having the ability with context to be able to remediate quickly.
Any others have recommendations for OMB?
Yes, and I want to add on to something that Scott said in the earlier question. One of the things that we do at the department is have independent assessments of our insider threat program, where people come in and make sure that we're following our procedures correctly as well, to give everyone a warm fuzzy that we're doing everything that we're supposed to do. Now, to answer the question on the guidance, if OMB decides to update the guidance, yes, to make sure they put it in clear language that includes unclassified people and the parameters around how we are to monitor those classified people. The other recommendation, and your keynote speaker touched on this before, is to make sure the guidance is included, or recommendation of guidance is included, to have insider threat risks involved in the creation of deployment of any new program, to make sure that is integral part of the creation of any new program, that they consider what are the insider threat risks and what are the security measures that they need to put around that. And lastly, to talk to agencies about, especially for our agency, I'm going to speak of where that they could get funding for insider threat programs, or where can we have shared services for such programs or security programs in the federal space.
Great, thank you. So we have a soft stop at 3:30. So Zach, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I was just going to echo, clarity and objectives in terms of what OMB were to put out, and then flexibility in terms of implementation. The one size fits all isn't going to work in this space.
So my comment is probably really obvious. It's require independent oversight, require privacy impact assessments to be published, maybe address the de minimis use of government furnished equipment for personal purposes. That point needs to be refined in the environment we're in now compared to 10, 15 years ago when that was written. And I'd like to see the message sent out more broadly that the Insider Threat Program is an opportunity to stop someone from spiraling out of control and give them a chance to change their behavior or to correct the problem before it's too late. I don't know that OMB guidance is the best way to do that, but somehow I'd like to see that message more broadly shared.
Great, thank you. And, for Department of Justice, Homeland Security, and FDIC, I know you all have wonderful privacy offices. So you guys are set there. So great that you're going to be collaborating with those offices as you build these programs. So we are officially at time. I want to thank all of our panelists for all their perspectives today, and then hand it back over to my colleague, Ross. Ross, over to you.
Thank you guys very much. We really appreciate it. And thank you to Code 42 again for making this happen. If anybody watching this is interested, we will send a follow-up email to the list with a cut of this video, hopefully either by the end of the week or the beginning of the next, and happy to facilitate introductions or talk further. So thank you all very much. We appreciate it and have a wonderful day.